Looking there at strikes on Kharkiv, we're going to bring up some pictures as well from the strikes on Kiev this morning. Another apartment block attacked. We actually had images of the moment of impact. This is getting closer to the center of Ukraine's capital. Does that signal to you that we could be seeing a new phase in the war?
Oh, for sure, the Russians are still trying their best to take Kiev. I mean, that's the capital, and that would have if they succeed, this would have a major psychological impact on the Ukrainian resistance. So they're still on, they're still fighting, and even though they talk peace at the same time, the military operations are continuing for sure.
We'll talk about the peace talks in just a moment, but you mentioned the resistance and the response. Kyiv is right now under a 35-hour curfew round the clock, and I was listening to some suggesting that's a bit extraordinary, that might be being done for strategic military purposes for a counterattack. Does that make any sense to you? What could be going on there?
It could be that, or it could be also because the Ukrainians are moving troops inside the city at different spots, and they don't want to get civilians in the way, because obviously they can be seriously hurt by that. So it could be a number of reasons for that.
But maybe just to keep civilians out of the way of whatever is going on. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. I know one of your areas of research is NATO, and we're keeping a watch on what's going on in Brussels this morning, a meeting of the defense ministers ahead of next week's Leaders Summit. The Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, has talked about Russia's potential use of chemical weapons and warned, in his words, there will be a high price to pay if Russia uses chemical weapons. What's your assessment of the likelihood of that?
Well, it seems to be unlikely. I mean, Russia, if they use chemical weapons, that is an extremely strong violation of any international law. Russia would be putting itself in a very difficult position. Even China would not be able to support that. I think it's doubtful that they will use chemical weapons because then, and also there's another reason for that, is that they're not that effective. That's why they're not being used since World War I, because it depends on the wind, depends on so many factors that I think it's doubtful.
Fingers crossed that that is in fact the case and we don't witness that again in this conflict. But certainly world leaders are talking about that, including American leaders like Joe Biden. We're going to be watching the United States today, as you well know, Professor, because Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be addressing Congress today. And the expectation he will ask again for a no-fly zone. But based on some of the reporting that we're also hearing from the New York Times, for example, he'll be asking for planes, again, jets to fly, drones, sophisticated drones, communications jamming equipment, long-range anti-ship missiles now, high-tech air defense systems. As you listen to that list of military weapons that could be brought to bear, what do you think of that ask?
Well, it's a fair ask in the sense that Ukraine definitely needs all this material, this equipment. But on the other hand, you have to keep in mind that these are very complex systems, and you need to train the personnel using this, and that can take weeks, if not months, depending on the system we're talking about. So, so is it for the immediate or is it for the longer term? That's the other question we should ask. But and with respect to the no-fly zone, I mean, this is a no-go because there's all kinds of risk attached to that. One of them, of course, is for NATO to get in direct combat against Russian airplanes or Russian air defense systems. And that's basically a war between NATO and Russia. And obviously, no one wants that. It would just be expanding the conflict way beyond the border of Ukraine. So yes, these weapons can be helpful, but it depends on which system we're talking about. Some of them are very complex.
Okay. That no-fly zone, it seems likely, yes, from American lawmakers, we will hear again that that's a no-go for them because of that escalatory threat that you mentioned and engaging directly with an enemy that has nuclear weaponry. But in the absence of that, what do you think is the best available alternative?
Well, I think it's right now the both are trying to both sides, so Ukraine and Russia are really trying to get ahead in one way or another. For Ukraine, the best way is to resist as long as possible while the sanctions are hitting Russia more and more, and also the cost of the conflict for Russia is escalating. So that's one way to lead to a peace that is more favorable to Ukraine. Another thing that was not discussed much but could be done is for NATO to send more troops in countries near Russia, so the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and so on. And so that Russia will feel the need to send troops also elsewhere, because there is this kind of deep paranoia, I would say historical paranoia of Russia to be invaded at any point, any time. So they may feel the need to move some troops out of Ukraine, or at very least not be able to send reinforcement there. So there could be a way indirectly to support Ukraine just by showing our teeth but not crossing the border.
Perhaps that is one of the items on the agenda as the defense ministers meet at NATO headquarters today. You use the word peace, and I'd like to ask you your thoughts on the talks which continue again today. And as I was mentioning at the outset, it looks like from both sides' perspective is there is some positive sense of what's going on, with Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday saying that Ukrainians must accept the country will never join NATO, and Sergei Lavrov just today saying a neutral military status for Ukraine was being seriously discussed. Now, as you listen to those two public statements, what does that indicate to you? Finland, Austria, neutral military status. What might that signal about the talks, and what would that look like?
Well, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that Ukraine not being able to join NATO, this notion was in place for a long time. This is no secrets. Until Ukraine resolve all its conflicts with Russia, absolutely never Ukraine will join. So by Ukraine giving up, quote unquote, this goal, they're not giving him much, because essentially they will never join NATO in any near future. On the other hand, for Russia to have a non-NATO country beside them, so Ukraine, that's what they wanted. But they knew also that they will get it because Ukraine will not join. So these peace talks are good in the sense that they agree on something, but it's something that was already kind of in the cards anyway for a long time.